Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to review the TV show Fargo, which I recently saw the first three seasons. And in my opinion, season 1 was the best one, I really enjoyed it. Season 2 was not as good in my opinion, even though it did have a lot of good moments, and one episode specifically I remember was really good, but most of it didn't fit my personal taste that much. Season 3 was much better, but still not even close to season 1, which was definitely the best season. And by the way, each season is its own story with its own characters, and so you don't really have to watch every season to understand the other one, and so I definitely recommend season 1. Season 3 was also very good. Season 2, in my opinion, not so much. Part of the charm of season 2 was that it was set in the 80s, it was a prequel, and I guess they did a good job of making everything look like it's the 80s and all of that, and so people who love period pieces and want to have some nostalgia about that time period, so maybe they would enjoy it. And I thought the pacing was much slower, the characters were not as likable, and there were a few prequel elements, but they didn't really play around with them that much, like it was totally meaningless. And it was even kind of a missed opportunity because they didn't really tie things together, they didn't show some of the stuff that they mentioned in season 1, and most of the characters in season 2 were just gangsters and stuff, kind of unlikable characters. There was a villain character who was kind of interesting because he was kind of an intellectual, and he kind of reminded me of Jules from Pulp Fiction. I guess that's what it was inspired by. So definitely there was some good moments, and there was one very good episode which kind of had kind of a Tarantino style action and comedy and tenseful scenes and stuff like that. So I did love one episode, but was it worth it to watch a whole season of build up just to get there? I'm not sure. I find a lot of episodes boring in season 2. Also, there was an element of UFO which didn't really lead to anything. It was just filler basically, so I found that kind of annoying. They showed the UFOs all the time, but it was all totally pointless, and so that was kind of random. And there was some supernatural elements in all the seasons, like always they had something strange and weird and supernatural, but it was always kind of little doses of it. For example, in season 1, one of the villains was kind of almost supernatural. He was kind of, even the way he was speaking, he was talking about stuff as if he was, living for thousands of years, as if he's the devil or something, or a demon. And he had kind of almost unnatural abilities to get certain things happen, which was never explained. And in season 3, they had all kinds of stuff about the afterlife. I mean, at certain points, characters who were close to death appeared in some place and talked, I guess, to an angel or something. So there was all kinds of supernatural stuff in all the seasons. But for the most part, the show is very realistic and grounded. And I really loved season 1, mostly I think because of the characters. They really felt like real human beings. They were not the typical TV hero and all of that. I often complain how nowadays they always do strong characters who are the best at everything with no explanation, and it's very unbelievable and unrealistic, and it's hard to sympathize with a perfect character with no flaws and all of that, and has no difficulty. And in Fargo season 1, we had a female character who was the opposite of that, who was what I always say should be done. A character with a lot of flaws who has to overcome those flaws and those fears and all of that. And that makes it much more heroic. A character who is afraid but has to overcome those fears is much more courageous and heroic than a character who just has no fear in the first place, who is just the best at everything right away. And so we had a very lovely character, and all the actors are great in the show, by the way. And we had a female character like that and a male character, and they were basically kind of very nerdy. Maybe that's why I like them a lot, maybe because, I'm a nerd myself. So I enjoyed seeing these nerdy characters and how they would act in certain situations which are scary and tough and all of that, and watching them overcome those difficulties and other people who want to interfere with them. And one of the villain characters also started out as kind of very nerdy, scared person who kind of became more confident and more immoral as the show went on. And at first he was kind of a sympathetic villain, but then toward the end he started doing things which are totally inhumane, totally irredeemable, and so he became very nasty. So that element kind of reminds me of Breaking Bad, which is also a show I loved, which had that element of a nerdy, normal person becoming an evil criminal. And so we had similar elements here, and here it was done in a funnier way. Like a lot of places in season 1 of Fargo I found to be very comedic in a kind of dark humor kind of way, which I love. And I think it's the best way to kind of balance out the horror elements, because there are a lot of scenes which could have been horrific if it was totally realistic without comedy, but because they made it all slightly comedic, it kind of balances it out and makes it more enjoyable. So I had a laugh at all kinds of scenes which would have been scary and horrific and less enjoyable if they were done in a serious way. So I personally love that kind of style as was done in this show. And maybe that's one of the reasons I loved Breaking Bad so much, because also it always had some comedy to not make it too depressing. Otherwise the show would be depressing if it was just about evil people doing evil stuff all the time, but it's slightly comedic and that makes it fun. So I really love the characters, I love the actors, and one of those actors, that nerdy guy, kept reminded me of someone. I kept looking at him and thinking, why does he look so familiar to me? And then I realized that he looks a lot like Tom Hanks. So I looked at the credits and saw that his name is Colin Hanks, and I realized that he's related. Then I looked him up and saw that he's actually the son of Tom Hanks. So that was kind of a funny surprise, because he kept reminded me of him all the time. He looks a lot like him, and he was great in the show as well. But the best actress was Alison Tolman. I didn't see her in anything else, but I really loved her in Fargo. And I loved her character because she's kind of nerdy, good-hearted, and courageous, as I mentioned. And also we had a lot of emotional scenes of her. She was really acting well, the way that you can see she's almost about to cry in certain places and stuff, and she was great. It was very good acting, so maybe I should check her out in other movies. I really liked how she acted. We had a lot of scenes of her kind of with subtle acting, with you can see that she's about to cry and yet she doesn't, the kind of her lip shakes and stuff like that. She can play those kinds of scenes really well, and so I really enjoyed her performance. And the character itself, she's very good-hearted, manages to overcome her fears and becomes a badass in the end and all of that, so I really loved that character. And the story itself was also very good. It had me on the edge of my seat. I basically binge watched season 1. Because it was so good, it was hard to stop. And in the end I wanted to be more. In the end I was sorry it ended, because I was enjoying it so much. So I definitely think season 1 is the best one. Season 2 was a period piece. It was a prequel. It had the same character of Molly as a little kid, and it was mostly about her dad. And her dad was kind of too perfect. It's the same problem I mentioned earlier about hero characters just being good at everything and perfect, without flaws, without fears, and so he was a boring character as a result, so I didn't like that. But most of the show was about the gangsters, about the bad guys, who were very unlikable. There was an interesting element of a woman being the head of that mafia and all of that, so all the internal tensions there, so it could have been great, but they didn't really do much with it, and in the end it was kind of, it ended anticlimactically, I think. And there was another story about Todd from Breaking Bad and Spider-Man's girlfriend, who were a couple, and they accidentally killed someone and had to hide it and stuff like that. And it had interesting elements, but they didn't create enough suspense, in my opinion. Like, something didn't work there. A lot of it was boring. And only toward the end there was one good episode of them kidnapping one of the bad guys, and it had that Tarantino kind of suspense and comedy together, and so there was some fun episodes, but most of the season was kind of boring, and I wasn't impressed. And not even close to season 1 level. Then I saw season 3, which was much better, but still not as good as season 1 in my personal opinion, and not as many lovable characters as in season 1, and once again most of the characters were the bad guys or people about to become bad guys, and there was another female cop who was the main hero, I guess, but once again she was kind of too perfect. She was just a badass from the start and having no flaws, no fears, and so it's the same problem I mentioned before, and it wasn't as fun and lovely as the season 1 character of that cop Molly. And I'm not saying it had to be the same thing, but it just felt not as good. And I did enjoy some little side stories there, like her looking up about her foster father and stuff like that. There had all kinds of little side stories which were more interesting than the main story, so I wish it would have just done that. She discovered her stepfather was a science fiction writer, and they showed some of his stories, and so I enjoyed all those parts more than the rest of the season. And as I mentioned, they added some supernatural elements. There were scenes of people kind of almost dying and seeing the afterlife and stuff. And I think it was done well. It was kind of mysterious. They didn't explain everything, but maybe it's for the best because this way we can debate what actually happened or not, and so it makes it interesting. One of the villains was kind of interesting, but they made him kind of very nasty. They made him very despicable and unlikable. And some scenes were definitely kind of dark comedy, but maybe a little bit too nasty. Not exactly in my taste. And also Ian McGregor played two people. He played the twin brothers, or maybe just brothers, because one of them looked much older. And I think he did an excellent job. He was really good. Playing two completely different people in their body language, their personality, and all of that. So it was very. After a while, you forget that it's the same actor playing both of them because he was so good. You can believe it's two different people. So I give him props for that. And they had that sibling conflict and all of that. And the older brother had that girlfriend who I really like. That actress, I forget her name. I saw her in a bunch of movies and I really liked her. And again, they had that little problem of making her too powerful. Like nothing was believable in how she's totally fearless, totally knows what to do in any situation, kind of a badass without explanation. And so that's again the same kind of problem. It also loses realism of the situation if I can't buy it. So season 1 was definitely the best one with the characters because they felt like real people, and it pays back so much more in the end when they manage to overcome their enemies and their difficulties compared to characters who are just badasses right away and have no problems to overcome. And that's one of the reasons I still think season 1 was the best one, even though season 3 was very interesting and very rich with a lot of stuff and probably had a lot more action scene and more special effects, even ones you don't notice, like the two brothers being in the same room and all of that. So I give props to season 3, but I personally enjoyed season 1 much more. And season 4 will start soon. I definitely will give it a try, but I kind of, because it's once again kind of a prequel, it will be about the 1950s now. But because I was so disappointed by season 2, I'm a little bit pessimistic, but I'll hope it will be good. And as I said, every season is its own story, but also they do have a little bit of crossovers between them, like certain characters appear, but it's always very little. So, but there is some connection between the seasons, and there is even a connection to the original movie Fargo, which is a movie I kind of liked also, even though it had some slow pacing, but it had that same kind of dark comedy and similar kind of drama and a similar story of a character who kind of accidentally becomes evil, things sliding out of control. So there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a direct connection that establishes that season 1 is taking place after the original movie, because that suitcase with the money that someone buried in the movie Fargo and it was never found, someone found it in season 1 of Fargo. So that's a connection with the movie. And every season is connected with the other ones with small little connections like that. So it's all in the same universe, and so that's really all I have to say about it. So I enjoyed the series. Season 2 was a little bit slow, but I guess it's watchable. But season 1 was excellent in my opinion, and season 3 was pretty good. And the original movie was also a pretty good movie, even though it can be kind of slow. But you know, if you watch this on a computer today, you can simply speed it up in places if you find it going a little bit too slow. Just speed it up, accelerate it a little bit without skipping it, without missing something. So just controlling the pacing, just like on YouTube nowadays, you know, you can simply put it on 1.5 or 2 times the speed of normal, and you can get through more boring stuff that way, and the brain kind of adapts to it, and so we can watch things faster and save time. So I do the same kind of thing with movies. Maybe this is a bad example because, you know, in Fargo, both in the movie and in the TV show, whenever there's a so-called slow scene, it has its own kind of beauty. It has some good music. It shows wide shots of nature and stuff like that. So it's not always a good idea to skip it or to accelerate it because it will ruin the music and the atmosphere and all of that. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but maybe sometimes if someone is walking through some dark corridor or something, or through a fog for a few minutes, then maybe accelerating it a little bit is a good idea. But not always. Sometimes, you know, the suspense itself, if it works for you, maybe you would enjoy it more, so maybe don't skip it. So I guess it all depends. So that's all I really had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below. and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.